Okay, so I'm going to explain how to evaluate an entrepreneurial opportunity. So when you join a startup, your goal is to understand how much money are you going to make and whether that is fair for the effort that you're going to put in. When you get involved with a company, the first thing that you should ask is what is the current valuation? So let's assume that the current valuation is 5 million. Then what you want to find out is what is the target valuation. So the target valuation, let's say, is 50 million. Now, if the company does not take any additional capital and it goes from 5 million valuation to 10 million valuation, then your return on investment is going to be this divided by this is going to be 10x. Now, here's one very important detail. A company will likely need to take additional capital, and so you will get diluted. Now, the question is, does it need to take additional capital in the beginning? Because if it is at a 5 million valuation and it takes your dollar, and then all of a sudden your dollar, instead of on 5 million, ends up being a dollar on 10 million because of another $5 million investment, then your position just got cut by half. So your return on investment becomes 5 rather than 10x, right? Now, if the venture gets to 45 million valuation and then takes 5 million, then you're going to get slightly hit. So it might your return on investment might be 9x rather than 10x. Right? Now, the question then becomes, how do you arrive at a target valuation? Well, generally you work off of your revenues. So if a company has $50,000 in valuation, you can assume that the valuation ballpark is going to be 3x revenues. So if you have this 3x revenues, then it becomes you need 16 million in revenues in order to justify, or 16.6, repeating, in order to justify $50 million valuation. In subscription businesses, however, you do a 5x on revenue. So you need to generate 10 million in revenues in order to get a valuation of 50 million. If you're targeting 30 million in revenues, so then your target is going to be this times this, 150, and your return on investment becomes 30. So for every $1 that you invest, that dollar is now going to be worth, is equal to this times this, $30. Again, to get to $150 million valuation or $30 million in revenues, then the question becomes, well, what are your revenues now? So let's say they're 250,000. So notice that here, your multiple is much more aggressive than 5. But that's okay, because if you're getting involved with an early stage venture, they haven't monetized yet. So the multiple may be anywhere between 10x and up to 30x. If it's over 30x, you're getting involved with a really early stage venture. So be very careful there. But 20x is within a reasonable range. So the question then becomes, to get from 250,000 in revenues per year to 30 million, that's a big jump. So the question is how? And this is where you can ask the CEO, you can ask the management these questions as to what is the strategy for the venture. Now, for you personally, there's a question of how much do you get. So let's say that your total compensation is $70,000, right? And let's say that you take in cash $30,000. That means that your equity is going to be the difference between the two, equals to this minus this, 40,000, right? So the value of equity presumably becomes this times your return on investment. So it becomes 1.2 million. So your total comp for the year would effectively be cash plus total comp. There is a catch. These numbers look really, really nice, but one of the questions you should ask is, how are you going to get your liquidity? So the question here becomes, how do you monetize, right? If you monetize with a typical company, you monetize in one of three ways. Either the company does an IPO, right? So that's super rare. The company can get sold to another venture, which is also very risky, or the company can start paying dividends. But startups very rarely pay dividends. In our case, what we do is we give ownership over revenues, as I've explained in the other video, so the risk is much lower from the perspective of monetization, right? But there are certain benefits. There are also certain risks involved because of the novelty of this model. But effectively, this is how you assess a startup opportunity. You look at what is the current valuation, what is the target valuation, do you believe it? And you can use the multiple on revenues to assess whether this valuation is reasonable. And then you can ask the question of like, well, what's the market size? How are you going to get there? Do you need additional capital? How much are you going to get diluted in the process? So if you're looking at a 30x return on investment, that's probably going to go down with dilution as the company takes more capital or gets diluted through other means, through labor, as would be in our case. And then when assessing your compensation, you look at your total comp. So that should generally be market rate. And then you look at how much of it is going to be cash, how much of that is going to be equity. In our case, we allow only up to a certain amount for different roles to take as cash, and the rest they have to take as equity. And that gives you the total value of your equity, and that gives you the total comp for that year. So that's how you do that assessment.